Thank you.
Talk a little bit about cybersecurity. When
Yeah.
you think of register of deeds, I don't think of cybersecurity.
Well,
How is that pertinent?
yes, and thank you, Carter, for that. I wanted to bring this up because, yeah, so we've seen this happen. Last year, there were over 160 ransomware hacker attacks across the U.S., and they tend to target local governments because the IT departments are often understaffed, and they know that they can probably get the ransom payment. So this year, we actually had a really big ransomware attack in Durham County. And so that was a big problem. And the result in the Register of Deeds office was that their entire system was down for an entire month. So from March until April, nobody could buy or sell a home. No lenders, no closing attorneys, no realtors were paid, and the entire real estate economy came to a standstill. Right. So this is a big problem facing not just the entire county, but our Register of Deeds specifically as well. And so, it's my personal belief that anyone whose job is to protect a public database needs to be a cybersecurity activist. And so that's what I am, and if elected,
Now
that's
what
what I
does that
continue
mean?
to be.
What does
Yeah,
that entail? I mean, because let's talk about the county we're in, New
yeah,
Hanover
yeah,
County.
right.
Are we protected against this kind of stuff that you're talking about?
Yeah, so we have an IT department that definitely is aware of these problems. But I think that specifically the Register of Deeds, what I would propose is that since the Register of Deeds houses this massively important database with some of the most important assets that many of our residents will ever own, right? Their homes. That's
Yeah, I'm
super
down.
important.
Yeah.
That we need to make extra special sure that we're protecting this asset. And unfortunately, my opponent has come out publicly. I've been talking a lot about this, and my opponent said, she stated that she doesn't think that this is a very big issue. She doesn't prioritize this. She said that
The cybersecurity.
right, and so I find that very troubling. And so it's to me this is a big point. I think it's really important.
When she says cybersecurity isn't a big issue, is she aware about Durham?
She said if we were targeted by a ransomware attack like Durham County was, that our servers would be back up and running within 8 hours. So if you compare Durham County, which is significantly larger than ours,
Yes.
the much larger IT department, they
Both
were
in
down for a month.
geography and population.
Right. So I'm not really reassured by her confidence.
How long did it take Durham to get back up?
So the initial breach was March 6th, and I believe it was April 6th before they
So
were
that's
able
30
to.
days.
That's right. So
Okay,
it's-
now it took Durham, which has Duke, Chapel Hill,
Right.
and State.
Yeah, right.
Not to mention Triangle. It's the Triangle area, right? The
yeah.
setup piece, and it took them 30 days to get back online,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's going to take us 8 hours.
I think it's wishful thinking, and I think it's short-sighted, and I'm concerned about it. Frankly, I think that this is a really pressing issue that we need to be aware of.
Why
And
isn't it more of an issue here about it?
I think that folks are not aware of it. Obviously, we've got so many other
Because
things
I
to
wasn't
be
aware
worrying
of it
about.
till 2 minutes ago.
Right, right. Well,
I had heard about Durham.
yeah,
Let me get that straight. Let me get the record straight. I had heard about Durham, but I never quite knew what went on there.
right,
It
right.
was all abstract, and so I didn't know the intricacies like obviously you're attuned to.
Mhm.
So I think most people are like me. You hear about it. It was a breach, and you move on.
Right, right.
Maybe we should know how do we educate the public that should be an issue here.
That's a great question, and I think that that's one of our big obligations as the Register of Deeds, right, in regards to consumer protection. Making good use of social media and email and all messaging platforms to let people know what common, scams exist, and that applies also to, cyber scams and cyber, ransomware attacks and these things of these natures. The Department of Homeland Security is a really good resource for this.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'd like to see the Register of Deeds working more closely with them, just in terms of making sure that we are being as safe as possible with cybersecurity. I think that's really important.
Cybersecurity has got me spooked now. When you say that,
in addition, though, to hiring practices, like I said, I think that there are other ways that the Register of Deeds can be effective in being helpful to the African American community.
Right.
For example, something that I'd like to implement would be a way of helping with heirs property, right? So you're familiar with the concept of heirs property? Yeah. So this is when a property owner dies without a will, and so the property goes to their heirs, right? And then after a couple of generations, there might be 15 or 30 heirs, maybe across the country in different states. And so the problem arises where, an investor might approach these heirs across the country and offer them a low offer, below market value, and that puts the person that lives in that house in danger of losing their house, right? So it's kind of a double-pronged problem. You might get kicked out of your house, and you also might lose the value in your home. So I feel like the Register of Deeds has a great opportunity to sort of address this problem, being the closest government agency to the local real estate market. So that's why, as registrar, I'd like to see something like will creating workshops where we get together and talk about the importance of having a will. This is a problem that affects African Americans disproportionately because
absolutely,
because nearly 70% of African Americans in the U.S. don't have a will, and so that comes from back in the Jim Crow days where folks didn't trust white courts, which was fair, but that's a good way of making sure that we can prevent that problem in the future. And then with regards to genealogy, we talked a little bit about vital records a little bit earlier, birth, death, and marriage records. One of the things that they tell you to do when you're trying to sort out this title problem with heirs property is to create a family tree. And so I think that the Register of Deeds is sort of uniquely well equipped to help with that problem. If you need to, put together a family tree to figure out who the heirs might be. And then just being a central agency that can help with these problems. If you're suffering from if you have this problem, you can be able to go to the Register of Deeds and say that you need help, and they can set you up with a nonprofit or attorneys or whatever. I think that would be a very attainable goal for the office. I do want to go over that a little bit. She mentioned the People Not Property Project. So that's part of something that the Register of Deeds offers. About a handful of registrars across the state are involved with this effort called the Slave Deeds Program. And this is a really unique and great program. It's based out of UNCG, the library there. There's an organization called the People Not Property Project. And their goal is to create a digitized and searchable database of slave deeds in North Carolina. And so this is really important to the Register of Deeds office because, like we talked about earlier, this is where all vital records are kept from the county, right? But for the descendants of enslaved people, they don't always have the same options when they're researching their family history, when they're looking at their genealogy. Their ancestors were more often than not excluded from those kinds of vital documents. So in a lot of ways, slave deeds can be the only record of a lot of folks' ancestors' lives. So I think it's a very important project, and as registrar, I want to make sure that we're really getting involved with it, with the People Not Property Project, and see if we can digitize more slave deeds from this area.
And I just got a text of